welcome back to the IT's Her Future podcast. If you wish to reach out to us, please do so through our email, itsherfuture@kpmg.co.uk. I'm your host Neve, and this week we'll be discussing parenthood in the workplace. This episode is aimed at parents and for those of us who work with colleagues who have children. We'll be covering topics such as family dynamics, how to balance work and family life, and also what we can do to support parents in the workplace and how COVID-19 affected parenting. For this discussion, we have two guests this week, Azriel and Amy. So why don't we briefly just go around and say what our roles within the company are and how we got here. So Amy, would you like to introduce yourself and your role within the company first?
Definitely. So I'm Amy. I've been with the company for around 7 years now, so have pretty much grown up in KPMG. I started off in the recruitment function for Malta, and approximately 4 years ago, I started working in the L&D function for both Malta and the UK.
Great, thank you. And Az, would you like to go next?
Sure. So Azriel, a lot of people refer to me as Az. I've been working in KPMG since January 2019. My role in MBS is head of technology, which means I'm involved usually in complicated implementations. I'm also leading the architecture capability in the UK, developing a community of people and improving us as a technical bunch or functional bunch of architects.
Okay, great. Thanks for introducing yourselves. And to the listeners, I'm Neve, as I already mentioned, and I'm also within the MBS capability. So the topic is about parenting and parenthood in the workplace. So would you like to just give a little bit of insight to the audience as to your family dynamics and your roles within that? So Az, would you like to go first this time?
Sure. So I'm the older one between Amy and me. And I have actually 4 boys. 2 of them were born in Israel, where we originate from, and 2 were born here in Wales. In Israel, the work-life balance is different than it is in the UK. In high tech, it's quite common for people to work 50 hours a week as a base, unlike the UK. And I have found that the jobs I had were always far away from home. Traffic in Israel is much more chaotic, and commuting for hours was the common thing for me. Where here in the UK, I was lucky enough to usually live either in commuting distance initially, and then later when I joined consulting in IBM and later in KPMG and travel for clients, I actually was away from home more. So the dynamics actually changed from being very much out of the house, working 10, 12-hour days with a long commute, seeing the kids on the weekend when I was in Israel, to being close by, spending more time with the kids here initially. But then it again escalated to a point I was working again 12 hours a day here in Cardiff and seeing the kids less. And throughout this time, obviously, we couldn't raise a family without my wife. My wife has chosen to sacrifice all of what she was doing to support and build a family the way we wanted to. So when I was in university, she worked. She didn't study, but that allowed me to study and get through university because she was the breadwinner. In Israel, we both had jobs, and it was very hard and very hectic. But here in the UK, she was able to take a step back and invest in family and support us through this time. So in a way, I always say that I work for her and the kids, but the real boss behind the scene is my wife, and she's the foundation that everything is done upon.
Thank you for that insight. It was actually really sweet to hear. Amy, would you like to discuss your family dynamic?
Definitely. So I'm a parent to a 7-year-old. So my 7-year-old son is called Ben. So I had him when I was working in a recruitment agency. So I was working with a startup company, and it was a bit of an adventure back then because we were starting a company from scratch and building the desks. But then once I found out that I was pregnant with my son and that I was transitioning to a new life and becoming a parent, and I was very, very young back then, so I was around 24 or 25 years old. Things did change a lot for me, so I wanted to focus more on transitioning to becoming a parent. So moving on from that wild and newlywed life to focusing on raising this new human being that we were blessed with back then. So that is when I started really looking for a job which would give me a lot of stability. So that is when I landed actually with KPMG. So it was the job that I had to relax, let's say, because it was an internal role, not a client-facing role. So when I met with one of the directors back then, I was very clear on my requirements. So listen, I'm a mom, I need to be able to work from home, kind of expecting him to say, oh no, you're so demanding. You walked in and you're giving me all these demands. I was just like, yeah, fine, that's amazing. Like, welcome on board. So then the journey kind of started from there. Unfortunately, then around when my son was around 4, I became more of a co-parenting type of relationship. But I am truly lucky as well because I still have someone who is helping me out to raise Ben, but that dynamic kind of shifted. And I guess also then the pressure increased for me as then I had to become more of a breadwinner for Ben. But I think I was very blessed in this journey because I've always been surrounded by people who have been very supportive of that. And I think it's also really helped that I was always very open about it. So very open about what I needed, very open about what my struggles are at the moment. So that opened up a very transparent relationship with the people that I was working with.
It's amazing. So the next question I'm going to ask is about the topic of parental leave. So at KPMG, the policy is 2 weeks paid paternity leave and up to 52 weeks maternity leave, regardless of your length of service. And you have to take off 2 weeks following childbirth as compulsory maternity leave. So I was just wondering if you could discuss how much time you both took off after your children were born. Did you use the full entitlement you were given? Did you decide to go back early? And how did you find that transition? Especially you as considering you have multiple children. So was it easier? Was it more difficult? So would you like to go first?
So I haven't had any children whilst in KPMG. I came here with relatively older children, but it's very different throughout my life. So in Israel, paternity leave is 24 hours. Basically, you're there. You can support your wife through delivery. And I was at work the next day, both times. When I moved to the UK and had 2 more children here, the company I worked for didn't have a policy. So the first time they've allowed me a week of paternity leave. And the second time when I had a child, they've decided that's too much and they took it back to statutory pay. So I'm really glad that KPMG has 2 weeks paternity leave and 52 week maternity leave, because in Israel, it's, I think, roughly 3 months for the woman. And I remember the struggles and the guilt of my wife and me going back to work, just having a kid. But the first one and the second one was really difficult. And at least for us, we had family back in Israel at the time. So it was easier because we could rely on them. But here in the UK, we didn't have family. That's part of the reason my wife decided to just stay home and take care of the family, because there was no support. That perhaps 52-week maternity leave would have actually given her the ability to transition between the stages, but back then it wasn't possible.
Yeah, and Amy, how long did you take off after you had Ben then?
Well, in Malta, that's slightly different. So I can only talk from a Maltese law perspective. So in Malta, we have a total of 18 weeks and 14 weeks of which are paid. And actually, funny story, because I got to know that we will be having Ben on New Year's Eve. So literally, as soon as I walked in 1st of January, back to work and, fresh leave entitlement. So I just planned the whole year because it was exactly perfect timing for that to happen. So I took the full 14-week entitlement, and then I had like 3 weeks because I saved up all my leave. I had an additional 3 weeks added on to that. And then I transitioned very slowly. So I started part-time hours. And then when Ben was around 10 months old, I started working with KPMG. Definitely, I think that the law kind of only thinks about the physical aspect of becoming a mother. So they're pretty much thinking a lot about physically when you could be ready to go back to work, because your body will heal within that amount of time. But actually, when you go through it and you don't really realize what you will go through once you become a mother, I'm going to talk from a mother's perspective, but I'm sure it's quite similar for fathers as well, is that it's very different from a mental perspective. How ready you are to leave your baby with someone else, how ready are you to start, shouldering the responsibility of a job, actually, when you're still getting to grips with taking care of another human being. So despite it being perhaps a good amount of time, there's always this added support that you need to go back to work, which might be different for everyone. But in my experience, it was quite tough to drop Ben off to daycare and having a carer take care of him, and you're like, oh my gosh, my baby. And then having to go to work and act like you have it kind of all together. So I think that although there is quite a good amount of weeks, there's a lot more to be taken into consideration as well when thinking about maternity leave.
Yeah, I agree. I was hearing how short you had, considering that at KPMG you could have a full year off. So that is a lot. And you did just briefly touch on it, but how was the return to work for you? Did you feel supported? Did you feel like you were on your own?
Well, obviously, there's the family perspective that was into it. But from a company perspective, as I mentioned in the beginning, I was very lucky because I was very outspoken about this, like what I needed from the company. And I always had very supportive bosses of this situation. But emotionally, it's very, very difficult. And it's something that you don't really know or prepared. So before, when you leave for your maternity leave, you don't really know how you're going to feel when you come back. So in Malta, you have to take a decision before you go out for maternity leave, whether you'll be coming back or not, that you'll be returning to work. Because if you take your maternity leave and the company has paid you for that maternity leave, you need to pay it back. So that means that you need to take that decision in advance, or else save it up just in case you decide not to return to work or to delay that return. It's one of those situations in life where you don't know how it's going to turn out because everything is so new and it's a very new situation. So you cannot really mentally prepare for it as such. So that's why I think that employers need to be very flexible and very much aware of this experience. For me, it was quite difficult to shoulder that, like to let go of that baby that you've spent 4 months spending basically 24 hours 7 stuck to, and then suddenly have to return back to the office.
Yeah, if I can share from our family's perspective on this, then when in Israel, when my wife worked, that short maternity leave is similar, and it's the emotional guilt associated with leaving your child with a stranger. And we're lucky enough that a lot of this time was taken by family, but even after that, even at the age of 1, 2, 3, leaving the child with the strangers, at least for us, was coupled with a lot of guilt initially. And will they be fine? Will they love them like we do? Will they take care of them? And I think one of our colleagues is coming back from maternity leave next week. Actually, she's been on, I think she's taken almost the full 52 weeks. And I look at how we treated her going on maternity leave and how we're preparing for her to come back and the things are going to put into play. I'm really proud to be part of a group of people that enable that, and that we are treating our colleagues like that. I think we have to call out that as an organization, we are really supportive and good. I don't know what was your experience, Amy, but I think now we are definitely there.
Mm-hmm. I mean, like you, I didn't join the company during my maternity leave, so I joined afterwards. But from the leaders that we have, I can definitely see that we are a very honest organization, especially with each other. And I think that we work in a place where we can be quite open with the struggles that we go through, and we have everything in place for these communication channels. I think a lot of us are parents. We've been through this. A lot of us know what it's like, so that empathic level is definitely there.
And when you get a call that a child is sick and sometimes you need to drop everything and leave and pick them up, it goes well beyond that maternity/paternity leave period, because when you land back, there's a lot of things they never had to do, right? I never had to stop and go pick a child because they banged their head and need to go to hospital, or they were sick all over the classroom. And suddenly that changes. You might be in client calls, you might be in an important work meeting, and sometimes you got to drop everything and go.
Correct. And in fact, I have a funny story of this that you're reminding me of, because the first week that I was working with KPMG, I had dropped my son off to daycare and everything was fine. On the Friday, so I started on a Monday. On the first Friday, they called me up from daycare and tell me that Ben has a small fever. Like, can you come please pick him up? And I'm like, oh, first week, I'm already, I'm already demanding that I leave early. But anyway, I left and I picked him up. On the Monday, I walked in with him to the daycare and they told me, we can't take him. Did you get a doctor's letter? And I was just like, well, he just had a tiny fever. I gave him Calpol and he was fine. Like, take him. I need to go to work. It's my second week. And they're like, no, we can't take him at all. So work from home wasn't as big back then as it is now. So I essentially had to go to work with a 10-month-old baby in my arms. And I literally had to tell Pierre back then, I told him, listen, Pierre, this is Ben. Hi, nice to meet you. I just need to take my laptop and work from home because otherwise I just cannot work today. And he was totally fine with it. He laughed it off. But I had a lot of anxiety driving there with a 10-month-old baby on the first week of the job. So definitely your life does change a lot. And if, when you're surrounded with people who are empathic, then they won't bat an eyelid at you just having to rush off or having to literally walk out of the office in a run to get to daycare or get to school, or have to move a meeting because you have a school play or you have some event to attend to or your kid is sick. So definitely, I think the people that you're surrounded with is very important. So it's not all about policies. It seems to be less about the policies and the amount of benefits, but more about the culture that helps parents.
It is known that a woman can struggle to come back to work, especially after a career break if they've had children. So what do you think we can do to help encourage women to come back to work after a career break and not feel so daunted by the return to work? So as you were saying, someone on your team's returning, would you like to discuss that?
We think we're doing the right thing. Okay, I think it's important to acknowledge that we think we're doing the right thing. And the right thing here is not just to think that, but also to validate it with the mother. So we've had pre-return call with her beginning of this week. So well more than a week in advance, where we set expectations, what she wants to happen, what she thinks she'll be capable with, what we think we can do during that time. And in this case, we think that dropping her at the deep end at 100% speed will be the wrong thing. So we're probably going to start at 75% if we can measure it like that. But the idea is to give her time to come back in a relatively relaxed manner into the role, catch up with what happened. There's a lot of mandatory training that's an opportunity to catch up with colleagues. It's important not just, to come back and do a job. We need to meet up with colleagues, understand who's there. A lot of new people have joined, so it's a slightly different organization. MBS is integrated into Connected Tech in the time she was on leave. It's about familiarizing herself with that kind of work environment, even though she'll be now post-COVID working more from home. It's still she needs to get comfortable in the environment, not just getting back to her job. And she's very eager to get stuck in as well, obviously, right? She's a professional. She's very, very good at what she does. And it's important to be able to enable that immediately for her to feel satisfied that she's doing the right thing. She's not just sacrificing some of her quality time with the son and getting these soon-to-be guilt emotions that are inevitable from my experience, but also getting the satisfaction that she does have that work-life balance falling into place where she's comfortable with, she does feel fulfilled, she does get something she wants and can do, but not under so much pressure that she immediately unable to balance the two things without having learned how to do it.
I think that's very good. Let her lead it as well. Through having that call beforehand, she can define the terms as well, rather than everyone being like, you're going to do X, Y, and Z when you come back. So Amy, how do you think you would have benefited? What would you have liked to have seen as a returning mother?
I pretty much like that the approach that Az has just described here, where it's pretty much led by the individual that is coming back, so that you can pace yourself. As I said, it's like you're a completely new person. You don't know how easily you're going to get overwhelmed, and it is a lot to take back in and change in the routine, change in sleep pattern. So it's quite a lot. So I do like this approach that it would be led by the individual, and then when they feel ready to get back to the client work and perhaps take on bigger responsibilities, and then you pace that in, as long as I guess there's no discrimination then in terms of progression due to the fact that someone is returning back from maternity leave.
Yeah, of course. So the next question I have relates to a fact. So 39% of women report missing work to take care of sick children, whereas this report found that only 3% of men do the same. And some time use data suggested that women will carry out an average of 60% more unpaid work, such as cleaning, laundry, cooking, those kind of responsibilities. So what do you think can be done to sort of encourage more of an equal share of parental responsibility? So Amy, would you like to go first?
I was going to suggest Azriel to go first on this one.
So it's a weird thing for me because in a way I find myself in a 1950s house where I'm the man, I go earn the bread and the wife is back home waiting for me and dinner is ready. It's not like that at all, but That's kind of the basic appearance of it from the outside. When we lived in Israel, we were both working, we were both sharing. And yes, today definitely a lot more falls on my wife in running of the house. It's a full-time job. When we lived in Israel, I used to shoulder more of that responsibility for sure. It goes against everything I believe in to live in that situation, but our life, where it led us, we find that what worked for us. So I would have done exactly the same for my wife if the roles were reversed. Okay, so we always joke that my favorite perfume is bleach because I do like cleaning. I think that encouraging women to get back to work, enabling them to get back to work and supporting them the right way, I don't have the answer how. I honestly, I've scratched my head a lot, but I think it's important. I think we're still a bit in my view, in a bit of a patriarchal society where still we kind of push women towards these traditional roles. I know KPMG has got women in key places, which is good. It's part of that changing. And it's why we formed the Women in Tech group in MBS at the time, because we need to start changing that. I was one of the people setting it up. So I have small things I can do. I don't have an answer, to be honest, to your question. Either than we perhaps need to be a bit more understanding when the husband says he needs to leave, because in Israel, it was 100% expected for me that you get back to work, right? We don't care you have a baby. When I had my baby and I said, Thursday, I'm leaving work at 3. I'm not working 10 hours on that day. Thursday, I'm leaving at 3. That happened exactly once in my whole time working in Israel. Part of it was my fault. I wasn't strong enough, but part of it was also the expectation. You've got somebody else to pick it up.
I think that's a really good point. This two-handed approach of enabling women to be able to go back to work and have that extra independence, but to then give the same courtesy to men who may have to pick up the sick kid as well, instead of the stereotype from before. I was like, can't your wife just do it? So you need to give and take with both hands. Amy, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
I definitely think that every couple or co-parenting dynamic that there is, as long as there is an open and honest conversation between the two parties, that is not stereotyped just because you're a woman, then it's expected of you. So I think it becomes harmful when it's an expectation rather than, as was describing, like an arrangement, because we're dividing all the things that need to happen between us in this way. Then that could be constructive and it could be liberating, I guess, because everybody knows what they need to contribute for the whole family to grow and get by. And I do think that companies need to be, or bosses need to be, aware of the way that they speak more than anything. So rather than saying, so let's say Azriel and I both had to go abroad for work, and not asking Azriel, so do you have any issue with that? Any family commitments, etc., and only saying that to me because I'm a mother, then that in a way is enforcing that idea that I have more responsibility than Az has because I'm a mother and he's a father. And that's an unhelpful bias for the both of us. So I think it's harmful when there's these expectations that are put upon individuals without actually acknowledging the whole situation. I guess that if everybody's aware of this and makes a conscious effort to communicate with everybody in the same way, or to consider everybody's situation unbiased to their gender, then that would be helpful, I think, to break the stereotype.
But if I can jump in, because I think you said a couple of things that made me think. First of all, in my view, I suffer less from that discrimination that you would, Amy, as a man. Okay, I think whilst it's there, I think women are more impacted by that. Might be wrong, but that's how it feels to me. And I think if we were in more equal society at work, in a sense that we had a better split of 50-50 in technology, maybe the situation would have been better if we had more females rather than men leading. And when we look at the organizational structure at the E grade, we got a relatively good balance between female and male in tech. But as we go up, we know that dwindles. But maybe if it was 50-50, maybe that bias wouldn't have been as prominent as it is.
So I think that having a 50-50 male and female ratio will help in the cognitive diversity. So it will really help in the way that we operate. It will definitely help in the inclusion. So I think it will take a lot of education as well and awareness for something like this to be surpassed.
I think there are some really good points, and I think that is the point of this podcast. We're having the open discussion, and then people will listen to it who do have children or don't have children, especially people in my grad scheme. We're going to consider this, and hopefully as we progress through and become leaders within companies, we can keep this in mind and help create that inclusion. So the next question is actually surrounding COVID, because that was a really big shift that happened recently. And in terms of the move to working at home and parenting, how did that affect your work-parental relationship and lifestyle? So Amy, would you like to start?
So a lot has changed, and I have to admit the beginning was really difficult. So when COVID hit and there was homeschooling, and I have just one kid, but definitely it was a struggle. It started to help then when you attended meetings and you see someone else's kid's head pop up at the side and you start to feel that you are not alone. And we started talking about it more. So nowadays, I'm almost like I don't want to go back full time to the office because I love having this extra time with Ben, which I wouldn't have if we would be in the office all the time. It's a lot of bonus hours. But it does mean that parents need to be a lot more effective. So yes, life has gotten a lot more complicated now because you have to stop to make snacks in the middle of the workday. You get interrupted several times. So it is harder, but at the same time it's better.
Yeah, I get what you mean. And how did you find it with 4 children at home when you were trying to balance work and life?
So I'm on a different spectrum than Amy because Ben is much younger. My youngest now is almost 13 and he was 11 when the pandemic broke. One child was in uni, the other one was in year 13, and one was in year 7, year 8. And there was a good and a bad. And I'll start with the good. The good is that it rebalanced my life from staying away from home 3 to 4 days a week. You know, London clients, I spent every day at home. And I recently said to my wife that I realized that my 2 younger ones are at that age that I completely missed from my older kids. So I see them growing through a period I didn't see my older kids. And I do love my kids and I like them as well, which is beneficial. I did struggle in the beginning because there was a need for homeschooling, and there are things that I can help with and there are things my wife can help with. And when it comes to sciences, that's my thing. If it comes to humanities, that's usually my wife's thing. After a bit of struggling, I ended up booking kind of a slot throughout the middle of the day of 3 hours. And during those 3 hours, I had the first priority was my kids. So I try not to book any meetings during the time. It didn't always succeed, but I try not to have meetings that time. So I would do actual work during that time. And I also had time to give to my kids and support them through homework, through understanding, et cetera, et cetera. That was hard to balance the two things. I got moved to another client at the time that wasn't doing pretty well at the time. So we needed to get stuck in, and you have to balance that, right? Because people depend on us turning that project around, but my boys need me. Like Amy said, I love working from home. It rebalanced my life. I see my kids now much more. I coach water polo, which is one of my hobbies, so I'm able to do that more again. But the pandemic wasn't easy, and I realized I'm very, very lucky because my kids were at just the right age to enable me that. We have a backyard. It wasn't easy, but I'm happy now, and I'm happy with the balance.
Yeah, so speaking of that balance and just productivity, so in a different study, it was said that fathers working from home, 77% of them said that there was a positive impact on their productivity through COVID, whereas it was only 46% of mothers who said that they felt productive. So do you think working at home just has benefited you and your productivity? So Amy, would you like to go first?
Well, I guess we work in a very fast-paced company and it is quite demanding. So you just have to find a way to keep your productivity up. But I think you become very efficient. So I found ways to become quite efficient in my day as much as possible. So I've decided to completely switch off the KPMG phone though, so that I don't look at emails when work day is up and you don't get sucked into that blurry line between office and home, which is quite easy for it to get blurred, especially when there's a high pressure period. But I guess everybody needs to find a way to bridge that gap. So recently I've been blocking lunchtime, I've been blocking the focusing time. That has helped because there were days when I was falling into the trap of having meetings back to back and just accepting all the meetings that come to my diary and having the day fill up and not being mindful about my productivity levels and being mindful about my well-being and mental health and trying to keep up with everything. So I guess it's a bit of a learning curve, isn't it? Like we all need to find a way to adjust to this new reality, and it will look different for everyone, and nobody operates in the same way. So I'm not a highly organized individual, but you try and train yourself. So yes, I guess everybody needs to think a little bit about this and reflect to find ways in order to enable themselves to be productive during this time.
I think that's interesting. You've got to find the balance for yourself. There's no recipe you can follow to be productive. It's about understanding your working methods. Az, do you have anything you'd like to comment about productivity with working from home?
So again, I'm less impacted by my kids' time on because they're older, and now the youngest is, as I said, 13, so pretty self-sufficient between friends, football, water polo, and gaming. They don't have much requiring my time, plus the maths is getting difficult for me as well. I find working from home to be much more productive. There's less distractions that are in the office in a way that is now detrimental sometimes. So sometimes you need those distractions. Sometimes you realize you've been sitting in your chair for 9 hours a day and you had not a gulp of water. So scheduling those things in, trying to get some of that thread throughout the day, as Amy said, blocking out lunch, etc., is helpful. Trying occasionally to see when the kids come back from home to use them as an excuse to actually break it up a bit. One of them is trying to do some home workouts, so I'm trying to help and kind of encourage them and be them when they're doing the home workouts because they enjoy it and I enjoy it, and it's a reason to get up. I find working from home excellent in many ways.
Yeah, I understand what you mean. It's very different working conditions. When I work at home, I'll be at my desk the whole time because I've just got no distractions. But when I am in the office, I go for coffee breaks, but it's nice to have that more social aspect. So it is very different ways to compare. And with remote working, traveling to clients has been reduced compared to pre-pandemic, and it's made flexible working more prevalent, especially with parents who need to do the school run and all of that. So have you made use of any flexible working, and do you believe it has been a beneficial change? So Az, would you like to go first, as you did mention traveling to clients earlier in this?
Yeah, so first and foremost, I think people I work for in KPMG and MBS have always been flexible and very understanding. It's good to feel that it also has an official part behind it, that you don't just rely on people goodness. Really proud to work for a group of people. If I tell them I got to do something, then they will let me do that. And the reduction in traveling to clients really improved my work-life balance. And like I said, the ability to see my kids, to support them, when they had a tough day at school, which sometimes happens because teenagers can be a bit unkind at times. So being there for my kids and supporting them is really important. Traveling 3 hours to a client, staying away for 2-3 nights, coming back, you miss a heck of a lot. I appreciate flexibility, and I really appreciate the fact that I don't need to rely on it as much as I needed before. So 3 years ago, if I told my boss I need to go home because a kid is ill or my missus was ill, and that wouldn't have been a problem, right? Family comes first, that's the motto. But the fact I'm less out of the house now makes this much easier.
And Amy, do you have any experience about traveling to clients and how this flexibility has benefited?
Well, not traveling to clients since I have an internal role, and definitely we do have the benefit that we're more focused on the tasks and that you're doing your job rather than how much time you're spending on the job or when you're doing the job. So you can be very flexible in the way that you work and manage your own calendar as long as you're meeting the requirements that you're set out and you're being accountable and you're informing and showing that accountability. Obviously, the working from home has helped tremendously with work-life balance, because it's becoming much easier for you to set your own pace. Whilst if you're going in the office, then you're out of the house in these hours. So if anything happens within those hours, then you need to make arrangements for you to leave. It's much more obvious, you need to tell everybody that you're going to leave. You're not going to just stand up and walk out. Whilst like this, as long as you are meeting your deadlines and being accountable for your work and informing who you need to inform, it's a lot easier now to do that.
So the next question is, how have you found your work-life balance has changed as your children have gotten older? Has it been easier or harder? So as I mentioned before, my mum was a single parent and it was just her. So I know she found it a lot easier the older me and my brother got, because she could take on different roles, especially once we had both started secondary school. So we were taking ourselves to and from school so she could increase her hours. So how have you found it with your children getting older, what sort of challenges that you maybe didn't expect have cropped up? Would you like to go first, as you've mentioned, you've got a wider range of children ages?
I sucked at work-life balance. Okay, so I worked for years, over 200 hours a month, and I'm not saying it because that's how I chose to work. That's what I thought is the right thing for me to do at the time. And even though it was here in Cardiff Bay and I could cycle to work 11 minutes each way, I would still not manage to catch my kids before they went to bed. And now they don't need me as much. I'm much smarter and I am able to balance it better. It's less their growing that has changed this. It's more my growing that has changed this. I'm better at saying it's 5 o'clock. I can't stop today, so I will stop today at 5 rather than pushing myself till 9 because that's what I do and there's more stuff I can achieve in that time. I am the smarter one through the years and it's not their demands on me. It's how I chose to address the demands or create them. Going to water polo with them, doing other things, just stuff I choose smartly to do now rather than before.
I think that's interesting. It was more how you grew that changed it as opposed to them growing. And Amy, how have you found it? As you mentioned before, Ben is younger, so you've had a shorter amount of time, but would you agree that it's more your growth that's changed it?
Actually, Azriel's point did make me think about this a little bit. So I do think maybe there is a baseline of how difficult parenting is because there's the keeping them alive aspect. But then it's so that, you have to do that, feeding them and all that. But then it's as hard or as involved as you want it to be because you can be an extremely involved parent and want, to be there for everything. Because I see this difference with my friends who have multiple kids and myself that I have one kid. So you would think that having one kid is 3 times less harder than having 3 kids. But actually, as a parent of one, maybe I'm very focused on this one. So very much aware of his needs. I co-parent, so I want to suck up every moment that I have with him as much as I can. So make sure that I really bond with him at every opportunity because I guess my situation makes me a little bit more aware of time because there isn't the 7-day week period. So I need to be really mindful of the time that I spend with him when I have him with me. Also, I think on the individual child and the type of child that you have and perhaps how demanding that child is, or how you've decided to raise them. If you raise them in a very independent way, like walking to school on your own, for example. So I think it's all personal choice and you can become smart about it and you want to raise them in a certain way. And so all these choices are going to affect how much effort you need to put into the parenting.
But I think we need to also add to that at least for me, the fact I was working for specific people over the last 6 years now allowed me to do it better because my previous bosses, it would have been harder. I would like to think that I would have been as smart as I am now and was able to balance things as I am now. But I have to acknowledge the fact that, having a supportive environment at work also allows me to do this. And I'm able to still push a career forward and do things that I love and be challenged, but still able to balance it pretty, I wouldn't use comfortably, but as comfortable as I would expect.
No, definitely. And it's the same for me because my boss is actually a mother herself. So she's a mother to 2 kids. So if I'm going to school play, it's like a foregranted obvious thing that you'll be doing these things or that you'll be leaving at a certain time or that you have certain commitments. So I think that we really need to talk about this more and be more open about these things. So it becomes like a normal conversation that you would have with someone and not something strange or like it's a bad thing or that you tiptoe around.
So this is going to be our last question. I would like to discuss what do you think we as individuals can do to support parents in the workplace, especially women with children who might be overlooked. So Amy, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I think everybody should be open to having these discussions. So making sure that mothers are very comfortable to talk about their needs and talk about their day and their struggles. So I think we as KPMG, we do quite a lot in this space. So we have quite a lot of initiatives around well-being, but still it's everybody's responsibility. So it's not only a company responsibility, but a responsibility at an individual level as well. So for it to really become ingrained in our culture.
And what do you think we should do as individuals to support parents in the workplace?
I think support anyone, you just need empathy. So just be empathetic and try to not judge anyone. You haven't walked a mile in their shoes. Just be kind and try to support them. We're all trying to get through this life as best we can. So we've got different backgrounds. We're at the different points in life, all of us, and we've got different constraints. We don't know about each other's constraints. So just be empathetic.
I think that's a really good point. Just in general, I think we could all be a little bit more empathetic. And I think through doing the podcast as well, hopefully it reaches wider people. Like I said, I assume a lot of the grads that I work with don't know a lot about the struggles of parenthood. I'd just like to thank you both for being guests on the podcast today and for being so open about your working and personal lives. And I know I've personally learnt a lot about what it's like to be a working parent, and I hope the listeners have too. Our next episode is going to be about the pathway to promotion. And if you think a career in tech or with KPMG is for you, please go to our website, www.kpmgcareers.co.uk. And if you'd like to reach out to us at IT's Her Future to ask any questions, or if you have any topics you'd like us to discuss, the email is itsherfuture@kpmg.co.uk. Thank you very much for listening.